I'm briefly going to talk about the usage of Chemlights. Now, I'm primarily going to talk about their usage in a CQB context because that's probably what you're watching this video for. But no matter the context, fundamentally, Chemlights are used for signaling, marking, and communication. A lot of people think that in a CQB context, they're just used to mark cleared space and rooms. And although, of course, they are certainly used for that, there's a lot of different things that Chemlights can be used for and used to mark. For example, if you are using Chemlights to mark different things, you probably are going to be using different colors to mark certain things. What colors you use to mark what's going to be highly dependent on team and unit SOP. But as an example, you might use green to mark cleared rooms and space. You might use red to mark a primary breach point. You might use blue to mark a collection point. If you don't know what that is, that's basically a determined room where you're going to bring detained people in, so that way you can have all your detained people consolidated into one room. You may use Chemlights to mark certain hazards. For example, if you go into a room and there's some sort of explosive or chemical hazard, you may have a certain color to mark that. So Chemlights can be used to mark a whole bunch of different things. You can also use Chemlights to mark a specific person. So for example, this is primarily going to be in more of a military context, but if you are going to a structure looking for somebody specifically and you come across him, you can use a Chemlight to mark that individual. Because let's just say you go into a structure and there's 10 different guys in that structure, especially for something like the Middle East, where a lot of these guys are going to look very similar, especially in the dark and under nods. You finally find that particular person you are hunting and you mark him so that way he can be easily and quickly distinguished between the other 10 dudes that you have in that collection point, assuming you are not separating him and putting him in a separate collection point. That sometimes happens too. Now, one of my favorite things Chemlights can be used for is for deconflictions, both non-contested deconflictions, but especially contested deconflictions. I'll probably do a video for my Patreon on using Chemlights for deconflictions. But these are fantastic, again, especially for contested deconflictions. In my opinion, it just makes things a little bit smoother. Now, they are primarily used in a military context. You do see sometimes law enforcement utilize them too. However, I know a lot of guys in law enforcement and a lot of them have pretty harsh opinions on these. I think they're pretty stupid. And that makes sense for generally their context because probably 90%, if not 95%, of SWAT clearances happen in a residential structure. And generally speaking, they're not complex enough to use Chemlights. However, I do think Chemlights certainly have a place and a role in a law enforcement context, especially in the event that they have to clear a significantly larger and more complex structure, something like a school or like a hospital or some sort of very large, complex structure. I think they can certainly be useful in that situation for a law enforcement context. But generally speaking, for residential buildings, they're not complex enough to really have a use for these. Now, if you're working under nods, they do make Chemlights that only produce an IR signature, which they can be useful in a CQB context if you're worried about backlighting or something like that. But they're more useful in other contexts. For example, if you need to signal like a helo or something via a lasso or something along those lines, and you don't want to have people able to see a big green lasso with their naked eye, they can be useful for something like that. But for CQB context, they are useful, but generally speaking, they're used for other things. Anyways, that's a basic rundown on the usage of Chemlights in a CQB context. Certainly, there are other uses for them that I didn't cover here, but that is the general gist of it. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you did, please like and subscribe. I'm Tyler Austin from Gungnir Strategic. Thank you so much for watching.